Hi, I'm Barb Culver, President of Resonate Incorporated in Cincinnati, Ohio. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I'm really excited about today's program. I'm excited for two reasons. One, I always love to do the programs where I get to interview a guest, and I have a very special guest today. But secondly, I also think the topic that we have for you today is so important. For those of you who've looked at some of our past programs, you'll know that I started a series called When Life Shifts. And the reason that we started these series of these programs is because the longer we're in business, and it's 36 years this year, and the more life experiences that our clients and their families have, the more we realize how important it is to be a resource, to be a support for people when life shifts. This can be shifts of aging, it can be shifts of illness, it can be shifts involving divorce and death. But today, our topic is about retirement. And you might be surprised that I have actually asked a woman who is a nurse and has a master's degree in nursing to be my guest today. This is Julia Leary, and the reason that I've asked Julia to be with us today is because, in part, she actually responded to some of the previous interviews that we've done in this series, and she had a lot of valuable comments to share. And so I said, great, Julia, will you be my next guest? And so I'd like to introduce you to Julia now. Julia has over 30 years in nursing, and her experience includes hospital, outpatient, public education, and university settings. And the designation that Julia is most proud of, I believe, is the one that you've recently acquired. Julia is a board-certified psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner. And currently she works with children and adolescents, young adults, at a local community mental health agency. Now you might say to me, well, Barb, what does that have to do with retirement? And what I want to suggest to you is that Julia is a master at thinking through the changes that take place in our life when we are entering into those retirement years. And far beyond, although these pieces of course are important, doing adequate savings and investing and having a plan to follow, we know that there is another side of retirement that we call the qualitative side. And it's getting both the quantitative and the qualitative aspects of retirement right that lead to a successful retirement. So Julia, I was wondering if you would just talk with us about what you consider to be some of the most important softer sides or the qualitative sides of retirement.
Okay, thank you, Barb.
You bet.
I think the first thing to remember is that the transition into retirement occurs over time. There are many changes that come with retirement, and just like any other major transition in our life, like when we went to college, when we had a child, we grow into what we do. It's a process, and it's helpful to know that as we move in that direction, we will get where we want to go. Retirement often means changes in your roles in your daily life, changes in your routines, what you're going to do, what time you're going to eat, what time you go to bed, changes in your relationships with your family members, especially a spouse who you've maybe now you have more time to spend together than ever. It also may mean a change in assumptions about yourself and the world you live in. Maybe you've always dreamed of a hobby or activity you plan to do in retirement. Does that dream still hold true today? When you retire, you're leaving a life you know and moving into a new way of living into the world. Knowing you will grow into your new life over time can help you to be patient and kind to yourself through this process. Retirement is the next chapter in your life. The way you feel on the day you retire will not be the way you feel in 2 weeks after retirement, or 2 years, or even 5 years after you retire. So that's helpful to keep in mind.
Yeah. You know, what you're saying is so important, I think, because so many of us, especially now that we can work healthily into our 60s, some even into our 70s, have pretty much defined who we are by what we do. And for those doing days to be ending or changing in some way is really a big shift in terms of our self-esteem and how we define ourselves, isn't it?
It is. We may have been 30, 40 years defining ourselves by our job, by what we've done, raising our families, but this is a shift. And so that really leads to my second point I think that you need to do is to do your homework and give some thought before you get to retirement about what, besides stashing my money back in my nest egg, what is equally important to dream about, and what might I look at in terms of how I want to spend my time.
Mm-hmm.
An important question to ask is, what is your passion?
Mm-hmm.
Giving some thought to your own temperament, what your skills are, as well as your values, will help you to make a good decision about what your passion might be. Asking yourself, if I could do anything in the world, what could I do? And maybe you've asked yourself this question previously in your life, but it's a new chance to ask again because it's a different life now.
Yeah. You know, somebody was talking to me in the last couple of days, and they reminded me of a phrase that probably fits here, and that is that as we go through our phases in life, we learn, we earn, and then we return. And I really liked being reminded of that, because not to say that we don't necessarily return while we're earning, but retirement gives us that chance to truly give back, doesn't it?
It does, where we may have been focused on making a nest egg, making a name for ourselves in our business and so forth. This becomes a more returning to who I want to be outside of those things, and gets to your core person. Maybe dreams that you had when you were a child or growing up actually come out again. Maybe is this the chance to do something I always wanted to do, or do I want to do something I thought I would never do?
Yeah, yeah. I like what you're saying too, because with the longevity and the good health that so many of us can enjoy for 10 or 20 or even 30 years into retirement, it truly gives us this incredible gift of time to think about, rather than for our parents or grandparents who maybe didn't even live into their 60s, or if they barely got into their 60s, they hardly got to experience retirement at all.
Yes, that is very true. And it may be that what your passion is as you're thinking about retirement may not be your passion in 5 years. You may want to reinvent yourself again.
Yeah.
And because we have that many years ahead of us,
Yeah.
potentially, we need to think of that it's not just one idea for the rest of our retirement.
Exactly.
We can become a new person each day.
Yeah. One of the phrase words that we use to talk about retirement today is rewirement. So how is it that we want to rewire ourselves? And like you said, it's not a forever decision or the rest of our life decision. It's a decision that feels right for now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I would add that we all know our health is important to retirement. We do what we can to be physically healthy,
Yeah.
but mental health is equally important.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to acknowledge that our genes, our ancestry, there may be some things that we have that we can't fix or cure, but our attitude, as always in life, is everything.
Isn't that so?
And it's important to not to get out and be amongst people. Research shows that those who are happiest are those who are with other people, and taking the time to be with family and friends as well as making new opportunities for new relationships is important to mental health.
Great, thanks. Well, one of the things that people joke sometimes with me about, but underneath it, you know, there really is a level of serious concern, is when one of the spouses has been able to stay home, and that was, let's say, the woman, and that was her job. Her job was to run the household. Her job was to take care of everything in the home, including the primary responsibility for raising the children. And she has her routines in place. She has her friends. It is her life. And then all of a sudden, let's say he is going to retire, and now he, who was maybe gone 50, 60, maybe even 70 hours a week, depending upon career, profession, amount of travel involved, and so on, is home. And there's a lot of adjustment possibility there. There's also a lot of concern and anxiety about that, understandably. Like, what's my life going to be like now? I had it all figured out, it's working, and now there's this big shift. So what do you have to say about that?
It's true. You know, even if you're not retiring from a company, whenever there's someone in the house that hasn't been there all the time, you've entered retirement, you've gone in a new direction. For married couples, I think it's important for us to remember that each other is probably our most valuable asset in retirement, because it can be a source of growth. And the trick, I think, is to discuss in advance some of those things, or to think about those things in advance. When I was researching for this, I ran across a Fidelity Investment survey that said that more than 30% of couples have differing visions of what retirement looks like for them.
Yes.
And so that was kind of surprising to me in a way. It said that women are usually more interested in spending time with family, hobbies, volunteering in the community, and men are more likely to want to indulge in their favorite sports. And so a suggestion that I have that I picked up from a book called The Couple's Retirement Puzzle, 10 Must-Have Conversations for Creating an Amazing New Life Together by Roberta Taylor and Dorian Mincer, has some wonderful suggestions. They say to first sit down by yourself and ask some important questions, such as, how much time do I need to do the things that I want to do? What is it I would like to do together with my spouse? What are my privacy needs? Do I need a certain amount of time by myself? And to answer some of these questions for yourself, and then together look at your answers, see if there's some areas of agreement, and see what you're not aligning on.
Yeah.
And then continue that conversation so that you can at least understand where each other's coming from, and maybe you have more areas in common than you thought.
Yeah.
And you can develop and each have the retirement life that you would like to have alone and with your spouse.
Yeah. It's an opportunity for creative compromise too, isn't it?
It is, which is part of marriage.
Exactly. Exactly. Just a different subject matter perhaps than other conversations that have required creative compromise up until then.
Correct.
Yeah. So we know how to do it. We have had practice. It's just a new subject matter.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Okay, great. So we talked a little bit before about time, about this incredible gift of longevity that our generations and presumably the generations behind us are going to have even more time and longevity than we are given. But, oh my gosh, I know that one of the greatest surprises for people who, when we work with them on the retirement plans, who think, well, I'd like to retire when I'm 55 or 60. And then, well, how long are you going to live? Well, let's see, my mom, my grandma, my grandfather, my father, they go through the longevity with folks in their family and they say, well, but I never smoked and I eat better than they did and I try to take better care of myself, so I imagine 90. I say, okay, so what are you going to do for 30 or 35 years?
Well, we can plan for that as we do when we come to see you. The main thing is that you spend your time in a way that is meaningful to you. So again, taking some time to reflect on how you'd like to spend your time, whether it might be starting a new adventure, a hobby that they've always wanted to try. Travel is a big one for people. If you don't know what your passion is, you may know what it is, or you might decide tomorrow you have a different passion, or you might decide that you should know that your passion can change over time.
So when you talk about passion, you're talking about something like we just love to do. And that when we're doing it, all of a sudden we look up and we say, oh my gosh, I can't believe I've been doing this for the last 5 hours, 3 hours, whatever. Is that along the right lines?
I think so. I think passion is when time stands still. You don't notice what's going on around you because you really are immersed in it. And you know it's your passion because there is a congruence between what your head tells you that, oh, this is fun to do, and what your heart tells you. When you feel it both places, then you're in sync.
Yes.
And that's where you're supposed to be, and you know that, and time is endless at that point.
Yeah. So let's keep that thought in mind and focus a little bit on the opportunity that oftentimes people entering into retirement, if they are grandparents. Of course, one of the things that many grandparents get excited about is, okay, now I'm going to have more time to spend with my children and or my grandchildren. So we know that family systems can be complex. We know that we can have these idealistic views of family that aren't always true, that there can be tension, there can be stress, there can be disconnect in families, as well as closeness and joy and love in families. So how do we sensitively, how do we respectfully, how do we artfully engage with our families, our children, our grandchildren, as we move into retirement and we suddenly have this gift of more time?
That's a very good question, and that will be individual to your family, of course. I think first, decide how would you like to spend time with your kids and your grandkids. What is it you would like to do with them? Some people want to spend a lot of time with their children and grandchildren. Others would prefer to not spend all their extra time with them. So decide what it is you would like to do together. Often, I think a part of what we grow into as we retire, our normal development, is that we want to share our legacy, our family's legacy, with our children and our grandchildren. And that may not be something that they are actually thinking about in the same way that we are. So it's important to have conversations with your children and letting them know that you want to be a part of their lives, and making opportunity, be more specific. Say, it would be great if we could, just get together, depending on how close they live, weekly or monthly or once a year, if we could, go back to that old place where, you kids used to have a great time, old vacation spot or something like that. So just making your wishes known is part of it. And because families are so busy, and we know that because we raised families.
Yes.
Planning in advance so that they can be aware of that and work into that would be helpful as well.
Yeah. So I hear you talking about the importance of having a conversation, inviting your children's voices, your grandchildren's voices, their opinions, their wishes, their wants into the organization and the plans that are made about how much time are we going to really spend together and what might we do with that?
Yes, it's the communication is very important with this, because I suspect that many of us would like to share things with our grandchildren, perhaps stories from when we were little,
Yeah.
and just them hearing these stories helps them to identify who they are,
Exactly.
and maybe even gives them ideas about who they want to become. Gives them a broader base and lets them know that they have roots, and that there's many people who've come before them and who will support them. An example of legacy that I just like to share from my family is there's a legacy of volunteering and helping the poor and needy. And I think that I captured this from my mother and grandmother without really them saying anything, but by just watching them. And I'm certain it impacted me and was an impact in terms of me making a decision to be a nurse. And I want to pass those same values on to my girls.
Yeah.
And I think that by choosing activities that are of value to us and doing those with our children and our grandchildren, we don't really have to even speak them. They will know, and they will have the same experience from it. But it helps to carry out the legacy if it's something important that you'd like to pass on.
Yeah. I love what you're saying from two perspectives. One thing that you're causing me to think about is that we often say to our clients, there are two legacies in our lives. There is the one that we live every day by what we choose to do and say, what we choose not to do and say. We are creating what we call our living legacy. And then there is the leaving legacy. And that leaving legacy can involve, assets and investments and inheritances and so on and so forth. But it is also the compilation of the living legacy that we leave. It is those stories that we shared and that we told. It is the experiences that we helped to create. It is the values that we modeled. And what that does then is that helps people think about family culture. And every family has a culture.
That's right.
Most people allow those cultures to develop by default rather than by intentionality and design.
Exactly.
And you're talking about intentionality and design so that the voices are heard intergenerationally in terms of what's important to all of us about this culture that we are creating and sharing together.
Exactly. I do think that as we grow into our retirement years, that these are things that are dear to our heart, and we think of things that we want to pass on. And it may not be, our kids and grandkids will not be aware of this, but we can pass these things on because they will become memories in their lives.
Absolutely.
And they will be passed on that way.
Absolutely. One of the things we've been working on, just to close, is we've been thinking about new taglines for our company. And there are two that we're testing out right now. One of them says, Resonate Financial Advisors for Richness of Life. And the second one says, Resonate Financial Advisors, Life, Money, Purpose. So different ways of saying the same thing. But this opportunity, when life shifts and we have this opportunity to enter into retirement, what an amazing phase of life this can be for ourselves, for friendships, as well as for family.
Exactly. It's in our culture, I think sometimes retirement is looked at as the end of the road, but it really is the beginning. And you can make it whatever you want. It truly is an opportunity, as you say.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for sharing your thoughts and your research that you did for today and your insights and your experience with us. And thanks again to all of you for sharing your time with us today. You can find more information about our company at www.resonatecompanies.com.
Please feel free to either look at our website or please call.
Or if there's anything that Julia and I talked about today that you would like to continue a conversation or begin a conversation with us about, you can always email me as well.
Area 513-605-2500, and we'll be sure you get connected to the proper person. If you have any questions on this topic or anything else that you'd like to ask us, please